Selected 1. How long have you worn that sly smirk? How many years have you watched, silent and still, while they danced their little victories, believing they had you cornered? They mistook your patience for passivity, your quiet for fear. They saw only the surface of you, never the depth. They didn't realize that still waters run deep, and your stillness was strategy. While they celebrated scraps of triumph, you were composing a masterpiece. While they clapped for their illusions, you were holding the real power in your hands. They thought they knew the rules of the game. They didn't even see the board you were playing on. And now, right now, the final curtain is trembling. The truth from your soulmate is rising like a tide, and it will expose everything hidden. The words you've been waiting to hear, the confession that will flip their narrative inside out, is about to appear. Not because you begged for it, not because you demanded it, but because the time has come. He knows why. Deep inside, your soulmate always knew the truth. He knew who you were. He knew why the silence mattered, why the patience was sacred, why the smirk was prophecy, not arrogance. He held the secret because heaven had not yet given permission to speak. But now, the permission is granted. What's coming next isn't just revelation. It's a rearranging of destinies. A story they wrote without you is about to be rewritten in front of their eyes. That's why you've been feeling the air change. The nights feel electric, and the quiet between heartbeats grow louder. The exposure is near. The lovely irony is that they believe they were pursuing you. With their ideas and screenshots, their late-night group conversations humming with what they thought was proof, and their amateur detective work that seemed so significant to them, these self-appointed investigators were active. As you were building your empire in plain sight, you were giving them precisely what they needed to see. Every breadcrumb was set with care, every reply was precisely timed, and every moment of seeming fragility was purposefully presented to keep them chasing shadows. They didn't realize you were giving them precisely what you wanted them to discover because they were too busy trying to figure out your secrets. They are currently enjoying the identity league. It wasn't a coincidence. Checkmate was the result. The last maneuver in a game they were unaware they were playing. The best aspect is that they still believe they have won something. They still think they made you public. Permit them to enjoy their period of delusion. As you are ready to demonstrate to them what actual power looks like when it emerges in all its splendor and ceases to hide behind patience, let them rejoice. They required you to be a ghost, and that's precisely what you were. Shapeless, formless, and hard to describe or pinpoint. They fervently sought to confine you, categorize you, and store you in their tidy, well-defined, and regulated categories. However, how is cage smoking done? When something exists in many dimensions at once, how can it be contained? 100 distinct versions of yourself were shown to them. None of them is the whole truth, yet they are all real enough to pursue and authentic enough to seem real. They spent all of their energy attempting to determine which version of you was the true one, never realizing that none of them told the complete tale, yet all of them were. Do you recall when they first began to watch? When they believed they were being discreet in their monitoring, their incisive inquiries, and their little tests intended to catch you off guard. Didn't you see it all? They constructed traps, tried to catch you falling, and made a concerted effort to reveal what they thought was your actual character. Let's take a look back at those formative years. When they first determined that you were an issue that needed to be resolved, it was year one. They began by asking thoughtful questions, doing delicate probes, and trying to find inconsistencies in you. This level of the game was new to you at the time. You grasped something others didn't. However, even as a beginner, armor doesn't make the greatest defense. It's pandemonium under control. You provided them with performances which had minor discrepancies that they might exploit. Genuine seeming emotional responses that were staged to the microsecond. While you were researching their documentation techniques, you gave them the impression that they were recording your genuine answers. Sophistication arrived in year two. You started fabricating proof of weaknesses that didn't exist, triggers for emotions that didn't lead to something significant. You allow them to see carefully planned instances of seeming collapse in front of the right people at the appropriate times. They believed they were documenting your demise, but in reality, they were seeing your ascent under the appearance of hardship. You leaned into their game rather than hiding or bolting as they anticipated. You turned into the puzzle they were unable to solve, the unbalanced equation, and the tale that shifted each time they attempted to narrate it. You weren't trying to hide from them. You were flooding their senses with so many options that they were unable to distinguish between reflection and reality. Your strategy was brilliant because you were able to understand something they were never able to. The best deceit does not include concealing the truth. It's about exposing so many real facts that onlookers are unable to decide which is most important. All the personalities they saw were real. All the feelings they listed were genuine. All of the responses they recorded were truthful. You just never presented them to the same audience at the same time. Reality itself was segmented by you. Consider the layers that you painstakingly created. The public face that played by their social norms, nodded, and smiled. The secret identity that demonstrated deliberate vulnerability to certain people. The hidden persona that lurked in the shadows and used power moves they couldn't link to you. Even you hardly ever recognized their secret core while they were around. And the true you underneath it all. As the scenario developed around you, you were the director viewing your own film, making changes in real time and revising the screenplay. They believed they were uncovering the truth by removing layers. In reality, they were advancing further into a maze you had created especially for their psychological makeup. While each layer was genuine, none of them was comprehensive. They were seeing diamond particles. Every reflection is genuine, yet none of them displays the whole stone. This was not a case of manipulation. This was a work of art. They needed whole support networks to talk about you, but you provided them precisely what their limited vision could take without overloading their ability to understand what they were seeing. You were a combination of many options. Additionally, they were unable to comprehend that degree of change. The amusing thing is that they believed your inconsistencies to be errors. They would believe they had discovered the weakness in your armor if they saw you being reticent one day and gregarious the next, then aloof, then affectionate, then critical, then emotional. No, the one that was selected. The armor was operating flawlessly. You were showing that personality and identity are not set in stone, and that who you seem to be relies solely on who is looking and why. Consistency was what they desired. You added nuance to them. They want consistency. You taught them how to improvise jazz. They want an easy-to-understand antagonist or victim. You provided them with a multifaceted entity that completely defied their classifications. However, this is what they were unaware of. You were creating your own networks of true allies as they were creating their support groups to study you. People who understood your true strength without having to analyze it. People who saw your strategic genius and decided to support it instead of fight it. While they were developing ideas, you were establishing genuine connections. Assist more selected individuals who are prepared to accept this message if it strikes a deep chord with them. The lovely irony is that their fixation on you served as the catalyst for your growth. Every group discussion that was devoted to talking about your movements turned into a free market study. With each of their theories, you gained knowledge about mass psychology. Each effort to forecast your future step exposed their own patterns of decision-making. They ended up serving as unintentional advisors for your massive human behavior experiment. Through their resistance networks, you were researching organizational dynamics, observing the dissemination of their ideas to learn about the flow of information, seeing which stories about you took off and which didn't can help you understand viral communication. You were doing the most thorough study of group psychology ever carried out by a single person, but they believed they were looking into you. Similar to how a general examines a battlefield, you charted their mentality. Every individual who attempted to expose you was first studied. You became their ideal adversary by being just what would most successfully perplex their wants, blind spots, worries, and insecurities. You were restrained from the violent ones. You showed emotion to the analytical ones. You exposed reason to the sentimental ones. You didn't just adjust to their level of energy. You become their psychological mirror image, reflecting back their own limits while being true to who you are at your core. They exhausted themselves against an adversary that changed form each time they believed they had a hold. Priceless intelligence was the information you gathered about them while they thought they were looking into you. Each inquiry they posed gave up more about their thought processes than your response could possibly convey about your actual character. Each idea they came up with served as a window into their own cognitive constraints. They saw their own reflection in every effort to comprehend you, but they were too preoccupied with you to recognize what they were discovering about themselves. What you gained from this psychological mapping was priceless. Ability to predict. Because you knew their routines better than they did, you were able to predict their movements weeks in advance. You were aware of who would spread rumors about whom, what hypotheses would catch on in their social circles, and what kinds of proof would drive them mad. You developed into a human algorithm that could anticipate their actions, and you utilized that ability to guide them on the most complex wild goose chase in history. They believed they were getting closer to their objective, but all you were doing was guiding them further away from any significant exit and deeper into a maze you had created. You were master by years 3 and 4. You were more familiar with their patterns of conduct than they were. You could foresee who would tell whom, what hypotheses would catch on in their social circles, and what kind of proof would drive them in totally different paths. They thought they were moving on their own, but you became their unofficial choreographer, guiding their moves. The nice thing about this stage was that you were no longer only avoiding things. You were conducting. Unaware that you were in charge, you transformed their pursuit into a symphony in which they played both the orchestra and the audience. You were authoring their whole investigative story, but they believed they were writing an expose on you. Pure artistry was evident in years 5 and beyond. You had evolved into a full-fledged puppet master, an attacking thinker, and a defensive player. They had stopped looking at you. They were on a reality program that you produced, directed, and wrote the screenplay for. Every epiphany they went through was one you had prepared for seasons ahead of time. You weren't only defending yourself. For those who believed they were profiling you, you were creating in-depth psychological profiles. And now that you have an encyclopedia of their flaws, they just have a collection of shadows and ghosts. Your realization didn't happen at random. You waited until they were worn out by the pursuit, until they had expended so much time, effort, and emotional resources trying to figure out who you were that they couldn't go, no matter how much they wanted to. You waited until their whole purpose was enmeshed in their resistance to you. And then you handed them everything just when they believed they had finally found something important. You ended the game the way you wanted to, not because events compelled you to. They're celebrating a leak that was prepared months or perhaps years before. Each element is tastefully chosen to seem unplanned, but is really well planned. You planted the knowledge they believe they discovered like seeds in fertile land, watering it with just enough opposition to give them the impression that they deserved their finding. When they were just following the breadcrumbs you had left out for them, you let them feel like investigators. This is the masterpiece within the masterpiece. However, the breadcrumbs have many layers as well. They thought they were getting closer to some terrible truth about you with every hint they discovered. In actuality, however, each discovery was helping them learn something important about who they were. You transformed their inquiry into an uncontrollable self-discovery quest. And they didn't even pay attention. Their own innermost wants, blind spots, and fears were reflected in the evidence they believed they were gathering about you. Their own psychological patterns were projected onto the patterns they saw in your actions. The flaws they believed they had discovered were really their own shortcomings disguised as assumptions about you. You established a psychological echo chamber in which all of their inquiries about you resulted in self-disclosures. Every time they tried to figure out your reasons, they had to look at their own. Each strategy-related theory exposed its own strategic shortcomings. You were doing more than just dodging their analysis. You were transforming their analytical gadgets into tools for introspection. The most amazing thing is that they open up to you more than they ever did to themselves. They divulged every detail of their inner workings because they were anxious to comprehend you. Unaware that you were the object of their inadvertent self-analysis, They explored their own psyche while attempting to deconstruct yours. They are still unable to tell which aspects are authentic and which are really an additional layer of your strategic game, even if they now know it was all planned. Observe their reactions as they discover that the person they have discovered is, in some ways, both precisely what they anticipated and completely different from what they had anticipated. You told them the truth, but it's the kind of truth that makes everything else less, not more, logical. 10 additional questions are generated for each response. Rather of resolving the enigma, each new discovery makes it deeper. Because you didn't just disclose who you were. You exposed the fact that identity is a construct of which you are the architect. They were curious about your identity. You're demonstrating to them the basic flaws in the question itself. They're not just being outplayed by the checkmate. The fact that you were playing four-dimensional chess and they were playing checkers is illuminating. Every action they took was expected. Every tactic was taken into consideration. Your design made it possible for them to celebrate each triumph. Not only did you win, from the first move to the last revelation, you were in complete control of the experience. You get to grin the same smile you've been wearing the whole time while they look at the board in utter shock. The one that always indicated sovereignty, but which they took to signify capitulation. Their mental models are disrupted by the contradiction the revelation produces. At the same time, you are who you always said you were, and someone they can't even understand. They couldn't absorb authenticity when it didn't fit their expectations, so they projected their own perspective onto your true self, which is what they believed you were wearing. Just picture their faces now. Take a time to picture it clearly. The people who believe they had figured out your routines for years. They suddenly realized that they had been staring in the incorrect direction the whole time. The fact that they were mistaken is not the only shock. They were incorrect in ways they couldn't even imagine being incorrect. They found a genius and braced themselves for a monster. They discovered a successful strategist instead of the shattered victim they had anticipated. Instead of uncovering a scam, they discovered a natural power that had been influencing their surroundings without their awareness or agreement. How the group chats stop talking now? Everything is being recalculated by conspiracy theorists. Since the face you're presenting to them isn't the broken person they're looking for, the self-assured ones are doubting every premise they base their assumptions on. They don't think they were hunting the weaker target. Since the beginning of the game, this person has been 3 steps ahead. Someone who transformed their monitoring into cutting-edge instruction. Someone who used their persecution as a training ground. Someone who turned their animosity into fuel for an invisible engine. For them, the realization that their confidence was based on sand is the most distressing aspect. They were always feeling better. It was all planned by you to keep them busy while you worked in dimensions they couldn't see. Every time they thought they had figured something out, every time they thought they were getting closer to exposing you. The fundamental irony is that they can't see you clearly even though they're staring at your actual face. They have been pursuing the illusion for so long that they are unable to comprehend the truth that is in front of them. They created a perception of you based on their own psychological projections, anxieties, and limits. Even when that picture has been shattered, individuals continue to attempt to put the pieces of their initial misperception back together rather than recognizing what is really in front of them. They find it hard to believe that you never appeared in their narrative. They have just been little plot elements used to further your main goal. You are the creator of your own story. This moment is beautiful because it's not the end. It's an impressive start. Their probe doesn't end with the disclosure of your identify. Their actual schooling is just getting started. They now get to experience what it's like to confront someone who never posed a danger. They now know what it's like to recognize that you were never the victim in this relationship. As the top predator, you were always just patient enough to give them a sense of dominance while you watched their patterns and were ready to strike. Something significant about their basic character is shown by their incapacity to comprehend this win. When genuine power didn't fit their preconceived notions, they were never prepared to see it. They couldn't perceive power that didn't manifest itself in overt shows or aggressive declarations. They were searching for weaknesses to take advantage of. They spent years preparing for a showdown that never materialized, which is tragic for them. While you were engaged in a completely other game, they prepared for war. While you were constructing bridges, they sharpened guns. While you were forming alliances, they rehearsed attacks. While you were busy building, they were getting ready to destroy. They are now standing there with all of this extra ammo. All these tactics for fighting without a target, with nowhere to channel all this violent energy. Perhaps the most painful thing of all is how unimpressive your unveiling was. You gave them poetry, and they were prepared for fireworks. You provided illumination, while others anticipated explosions. They're confused about more than simply who you are. It concerns the very essence of conflict. You've shown to them that even the most resounding wins don't seem to the vanquished as triumphs. They don't include overt shows of power or spectacular confrontations. The vanquished seldom really comprehend what occurred to them because true triumph is so thorough. Let's look at the cost they incurred while attempting to expose you. What chances did they pass up? What did they lose in terms of personal development? Which relationships were harmed by their fixation and paranoia? Choose one. You didn't simply waste their time. You changed the course of their whole lives. They lost sight of themselves since they were so focused on figuring you out. How many hours did they spend discussing you in groups, searching for hints late at night while browsing your online persona? The mental effort put on hypotheses, research, and unsuccessful exposure efforts. You understand you didn't merely take up space in their heads when you multiply it by the number of participants. You completely invaded their psyche. You turned to become their main source of connection, their fixation, and their pastime. Unbeknownst to them, their whole social system was based on their resistance to you. Now that its foundation has been exposed as a fabrication, what will happen to that building? They constructed their relationships on quicksand by harboring a shared dislike of you. The assurance they had by believing they were outwitting you is dissipating like mist in the morning. However, the cost extends beyond lost chances. They give up their own personal progress, their own self-discovery path, and their own chances for advancement in order to attempt to destroy you when you were developing, growing, constructing, and producing. They were caught up in a never-ending cycle of criticism and analysis that only served to highlight their own shortcomings. Consider the artistic endeavors they never began because they were too preoccupied with analyzing every action you took. Because their inquiry took up all of their brain capacity, they were never able to acquire such talents. Since their interactions were all filtered via their mutual fixation with opposing you, they were never able to form meaningful ties. The persona they created as your enemies is dissolving like old parchment, because you were more than simply their designated target. You provided structure and significance to their lives by serving as their organizing principle, their reason for being, and their common goal. They needed you far more than you ever needed them, which makes this the cruelest checkmate of all. They believed they were pursuing you, but you're giving them direction, a reason to concentrate their dispersed efforts, and something to aim at. They now have to deal with the void you're creating. Without you to pursue, who are they? When you're not the main subject of conversation, what do they talk about? When you're not the common adversary holding them together, how do they connect? Chasing a ghost who was never really running took up the finest years of their life. They must acknowledge that you gave them purpose in life, even if that purpose was ultimately pointless and circular. The misery of their circumstances is shown by this void. They never established an autonomous sense of identity or purpose because they were so preoccupied with defining themselves in contrast to you. It was a destructive rather than generative worldview, critical rather than constructive, and reactive rather than creative. They must face the reality that they have no idea who they are or what they want if you are not their main focus. They have lost the ability to live proactively because they have spent so much time in response mode. They have been identifying themselves more by their opposition than by their support. Now, in all its pitiful splendor, the psychological dependence they established on their resistance to you is exposed. They developed an addiction to the drama, the sense of direction, and the sensation of belonging to something significant. Their lives had narrative shape because of you, The storyline of their tale falls apart into pointless episodes without you as the main adversary. Watch them now as they attempt to direct their investigation energies onto new targets. Watch how they try to replicate the excitement of the hunt using other topics. Observe how their preoccupation with you gave them a sense of fulfillment that nothing else can ever match. Because they weren't just after you. You were the ideal combination of interest, annoyance, and concentration for them. You kept them completely captivated by offering the exact balance of openness and secrecy, strength and fragility, transparency and opacity. There will never be another topic that strikes the same delicate balance between disclosure and secrecy as you did. They resemble junkies whose ideal substance has been taken off the market forever. The rest will seem like a pathetic replacement. There's more to the void you're leaving than a lack of direction. It has to do with lost significance, lost community, and lost identity. Their whole social network was based on their mutual fixation with figuring out the riddle of you. They lack the abilities to create a new environment based on anything constructive or beneficial, and that ecosystem is now crumbling. Hello, this is Mike Canary interrupting your regularly scheduled show for a little time. We are the creators of the Astral Atom Network and the Obsidian Inner Order. We've finished being polite. Our battle is a spiritual one. You are aware of it. We are aware of it. And we're working around the clock to complete this objective. We need the ammo, but I'm craving the blood of a fourth-dimensional Archon. Listen, you're doing more than simply helping us when you join the Inner Order. They never intended for you to have access to these special tools. Training in psychic self-defense, focused personal intelligence, and spiritual warfare techniques they scrape off the internet. We also meet in private once a week. Selected ones only on Zoom. Genuine Gnosis, genuine family, and real power. No filters or filler. It's a complete victory. You get what you need. We are allowed to continue fighting. So, instead of simply watching, give this video a like and tell everyone you know about it. Right now. Join the Obsidian Inner Order right now. Let's complete the task at hand. The description contains a link. Let's give credit where credit is due, but let's still have a good time. Deception in and of itself was not what this was. Each move has many strategic uses. Your right hand was constructing civilizations while they were observing your left. You were building professional dynasties that would survive their amateur inquiries while they were preoccupied with your personal drama. You were strengthening positions in areas they were unaware of while they attempted to reveal fictitious flaws. The very real power you were building up in dimensions they couldn't see was expertly diverted by the ghosts they were following. Consider the connections you made while they thought you were alone. The partnerships you established while they thought you had no friends. The assets you acquired when they thought you were having financial or professional difficulties. Each and every second they spent attempting to undermine you. You made an investment in your own development, but not in the ways they had anticipated or the ways they were keeping an eye on. You developed in ways they couldn't monitor, grew in dimensions they couldn't quantify, and achieved success based on measurements they were unaware existed. The companies you started under other names were never associated with you. The money you invested in markets they didn't keep an eye on. The alliances you formed with others who valued you for who you really were, instead of getting sidetracked by their manufactured drama. They never comprehended what you understood. Silence, away from the cacophony and diversion of public opinion, is where true power is created. You were adding value to unseen places while they were causing turmoil in apparent ones. You were dedicated to building, whereas others were focused on destroying. You established a business and a financial empire. It was spiritual, emotional, and psychological. Because they were too preoccupied with responding to understand their own responses, they were unable to understand the levels of self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and strategic thinking that you gained. The companies you founded under other names were never associated with you. The investments you made with funds they were unaware you had. The power you developed in circles they were unable to enter. The information you learned when they believed you to be uninformed or perplexed. By using their monitoring as a cloaking mechanism, you were able to take advantage of their focus on one location while maintaining complete control over the others. They were so engrossed in the puppet show that they failed to see that you had surrounded them with the whole theater, controlling not just the act, but also the audience, the location, and the entire experience. The people you gained as friends were not drawn in by charm or deception, but rather by proving that you are capable of winning the endless game. The individuals with real power and insight, the ones who really count, were able to see through your smokescreen right away. In the art of long-term planning, they found a kindred spirit. You were quietly forming a coalition of players who recognize that the true game is played in secrecy and shadows, with plays that span years rather than minutes, while your opponents were announcing every move and theory they had. The passive supporters of Jill of Pesco were Contwi. These supporters weren't only passive allies. They actively participated in your ambitious plan. While some supplied resources, others contributed their knowledge. Others provided opportunity and contacts. You all worked together to create something that was always greater than what any one person could do on their own. The alliance you put together embodies all the power and knowledge required to not only withstand their assaults, but to flourish in ways they cannot fathom. You surrounded yourself with individuals who recognized that having power isn't about dominating other people. It's about being a better version of yourself and adding value that others want to support. This network turned into your real asset, the cornerstone that made their resistance unimportant rather than dangerous. You were interacting with everyone who mattered while they were attempting to separate you. You were growing your influence in ways they couldn't see or comprehend while they were working to reduce it. Now that the mask has been removed, the mystery that lies underneath it is greater than the one that was concealed, because they must acknowledge that you are who you claim to be all along. They just didn't think it was feasible. They found it hard to believe that someone could be both open and secretive, sincere and cunning, weak yet unbeatable. It's not only your face that's shown. It's the faces of all the people who have supported you throughout this whole well-planned show. Invisible to others seeking wholly different patterns, the network of support was always there. You've shown to them that concealing your true self was never a source of power. Being so true to oneself that they failed to see authenticity when it was there in front of them was the true power. They couldn't comprehend the reality of someone who didn't need a mask since they were anticipating one. The lesson is just getting started, but the game is done. You've shown them something that will reverberate in their minds for years to come. That patience, planning, and the complete confidence that comes from knowing precisely who you are and what you're capable of doing are the keys to winning the most devastating victories. Not coercion or deceit. The chosen one intended to expose you. Rather, you have shown their own vision's limits, their own imagination's poverty, and their basic misconception about the nature of power itself. Beating them was never the goal of the checkmate. It was meant to demonstrate to them what happens when someone disobeys regulations intended to restrict their potential. And now that the dust has settled and the ramifications are evident, you are exposed as the creator of an event that taught them more about themselves than they ever knew about you, rather than as the person they believed they were pursuing. They were chasing a genuine ghost. However, behind all of their ideas and research, you held up their own image in the mirror to reveal their true selves. You weren't defeated by the identity leak. It was the ceremony for your graduation. And when you stop playing defense and start playing to win, the world is about to see what you're really capable of. The sovereign stands exposed because you choose to demonstrate to people what success looks like when it is meticulously planned years in advance and executed to transform resistance into cheers, not because the game forced you to. Chusen won. Your genuine identity was never concealed. It was only functioning at a frequency they were not prepared to sense. They're finally listening to the music you've been playing all along now that you've changed their reception. You are the conductor and composer of a masterwork that will be studied and appreciated long after their ideas have been forgotten and the symphony is over.